In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, where manicured lawns and picket fences paint a picture of domestic bliss, a seemingly perfect family's life unraveled in a web of deceit, passion, and ultimately murder. The Johnsons were the envy of Peachtree Heights. David Johnson, a 45-year-old successful businessman, had it all: a thriving career, a beautiful home, and a loving family. 5 years after losing his first wife to cancer, David found love again with Emily, a stunning 35-year-old former model. Their fairy tale wedding 2 years ago was the talk of the town. Emily seamlessly stepped into the role of stepmother to David's son Darius, a bright 20-year-old college student. From the outside, they were the picture-perfect American family, successful, attractive, and happy. But behind closed doors, a storm was brewing. Forbidden desires, hidden resentments, and dangerous secrets threatened to tear this family apart. What began as stolen glances and innocent touches soon spiraled into a passionate affair that defied all boundaries. As we delve deeper into the Johnson family story, we will uncover a shocking tale of betrayal that culminated in an unthinkable act. How did a housewife's illicit pregnancy lead to murder? What drove a son to turn against his father? And how did a family's facade of perfection crumble, leaving destruction in its wake? Prepare yourselves for a journey into the dark heart of suburban Atlanta, where love turned toxic and family ties became deadly. This is the story of how a housewife's pregnancy by her stepson ended in murder, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. To understand the tragedy that befell the Johnsons, we must first step into their world, a world of success, beauty, and apparent harmony. Let's meet the players in this ill-fated drama. David Johnson, 45 years old, stood as a pillar of the community. A self-made man, David had climbed the corporate ladder with determination and charm, becoming one of Atlanta's most respected business consultants. His colleagues described him as sharp, ambitious, and always impeccably dressed in tailored suits. But David's life wasn't all boardrooms and bottom lines. 5 years ago, tragedy struck when his first wife, Darius's mother, lost her battle with cancer. For a time, David's world crumbled. He threw himself into his work, struggling to balance his grief with single parenthood. Then, like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds, Emily entered his life. At 35, she was a vision of grace and beauty, a former model who had graced the covers of magazines and strutted down runways from New York to Paris. But Emily was more than just a pretty face. She was intelligent, charismatic, and seemed to genuinely care for both David and Darius. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding 2 years ago, an event that still had tongues wagging in their affluent Atlanta suburb. Emily embraced her new role as wife and stepmother with apparent enthusiasm, often seen cheering at Darius's basketball games or hosting elegant dinner parties for David's business associates. And then there was Darius Johnson, 20 years old and full of promise. A sophomore at Emory University, Darius was studying business, following in his father's footsteps. Handsome and athletic, he was the star of the university's basketball team. Despite offers to live on campus, Darius chose to stay at home, citing his desire to be there for his father and new stepmother. From the outside, the Johnsons seemed to have it all. Their sprawling home in Peachtree Heights was a showcase of tasteful luxury. Neighbors would often see the family taking evening walks together, David and Emily hand in hand with Darius beside them, all smiles and laughter. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind the pristine facade of their red brick mansion, tension simmered. David's long hours at the office often left Emily alone, her smile a little strained when he'd come home late yet again. Darius, while polite to Emily in his father's presence, would sometimes regard her with a look that was anything but filial. When David's back was turned, Emily's eyes would occasionally linger on her stepson a moment too long. Her laughter at his jokes was a touch too bright. In quiet moments, when she thought no one was looking, a flicker of discontent would cross her flawless features, hinting at desires unfulfilled and resentments unspoken. Yes, the Johnsons had wealth, status, and outward beauty, but beneath the surface a storm was brewing, one that would soon break with devastating consequences. As winter thawed into spring, so too did the icy barriers of propriety within the Johnson household. What began as fleeting glances and accidental touches soon kindled into a dangerous flame of desire. Emily found herself increasingly drawn to her stepson. Perhaps it was his youthful vitality, reminiscent of her modeling days, or the attention he unknowingly offered when David was absent. Whatever the cause, her attraction grew with each passing day. At first, Darius seemed oblivious to Emily's lingering looks and subtle flirtations. When awareness finally dawned, he was horrified. This was his father's wife, after all. He tried to distance himself, making excuses to stay late at university or spend weekends with friends. But Emily was persistent. A touch that lasted too long here, a seemingly innocent comment there. Slowly, inevitably, Darius's resistance began to crumble. Their first kiss was a moment of weakness, a perfect storm of circumstance. David was away on business, and Darius had come home early from a party, slightly intoxicated. Emily, lonely and vulnerable, had been waiting up in the dim light of the kitchen. Inhibitions lowered, they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Guilt and shame wed with desire in the aftermath. Both swore it would never happen again, but, like moths to a flame, they found themselves drawn back together. Stolen moments became more frequent and more passionate, a hurried embrace in the laundry room while David showered upstairs. A secret rendezvous in Darius's car parked in a secluded spot by the Chattahoochee River. Each time, they promised it would be the last. Each time, they lied. There were close calls. Once, David nearly caught them in a compromising position in the pool house, saved only by Emily's quick thinking and Darius's hasty exit through a back window. Another time, a neighbor raised an eyebrow at seeing Emily and Darius return from a suspiciously long grocery run, sending panic through them both. But the danger only seemed to fuel their passion. As spring bloomed into summer, so did their affair. What had started as a physical attraction deepened into something more complex. Emily found in Darius the excitement and adoration she craved. Darius, in turn, was intoxicated by Emily's maturity and the forbidden nature of their relationship. Yet even as their affair intensified, neither could fully shake the cloud of guilt that hung over them. Darius struggled to meet his father's eyes over the dinner table, while Emily's smiles became strained, her laughter forced. When David spoke of their future together, they were riding a whirlwind, swept up in passion and secrecy. But as any meteorologist would tell you, whirlwinds, no matter how thrilling, leave only destruction in their wake. In the Johnson household, a storm was brewing, one that would soon break with consequences more dire than either Emily or Darius could have ever imagined. As summer waned, a new development threatened to shatter the precarious balance within the Johnson home. Emily, who had been feeling unwell for weeks, made a discovery that would change everything. Alone in the master bathroom, Emily stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Positive. Her world tilted on its axis as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Emily's mind raced. The timing, it could be David's, couldn't it? But deep down, she knew the truth. The child growing inside her was Darius's, the product of their illicit affair. Panic set in as Emily realized the magnitude of her situation. She couldn't let David know the truth. She had to act fast to cover her tracks. That night, when David returned from work, Emily greeted him with unusual enthusiasm. She wore her most alluring outfit, poured him his favorite whiskey, and led him to the bedroom. It had been weeks since they'd been intimate, David's work schedule and her illness creating a convenient distance. Now she needed that intimacy as an alibi. The next few weeks were a master class in deception. Emily timed her discovery of the pregnancy perfectly, presenting David with the news over a candlelit dinner. His joy was palpable, his excitement genuine. Emily's smile, however, never reached her eyes. Darius, meanwhile, was not so easily fooled. When Emily finally gathered the courage to tell him, his reaction was a mix of shock, fear, and something else. A fleeting glimmer of excitement, quickly doused by the weight of their reality. "Are you sure it's mine?" Darius whispered, his voice cracking. Emily's silent nod was all the confirmation he needed. The color drained from his face as the full impact hit him. He was going to be a father to his stepmother's child, to his father's grandchild. The twisted nature of their situation threatened to overwhelm him. As the weeks passed, the strain on the household became palpable. David, blissfully unaware, threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with gusto. He painted the nursery on weekends, read parenting books, and doted on Emily with renewed affection. Emily, meanwhile, walked a tightrope of emotions. Morning sickness provided a convenient excuse for her pale complexion and frequent bathroom trips. But guilt was eating her alive. Each loving gesture from David was like a knife to her heart. Darius retreated into himself. He spent more time away from home, throwing himself into his studies and basketball with a fervor that bordered on obsession. When he was home, the tension between him and Emily was electric, noticed even by the oblivious David. "Is everything okay between you two?" David asked one night over dinner, his brow furrowed in concern. "Everything's fine, Dad," Darius muttered, not meeting his father's eyes. "Of course, darling," Emily added, her smile brittle. "Just pregnancy hormones making me a bit moody." But everything was far from fine. The weight of their secret pressed down on Emily and Darius, threatening to crush them. Every sonogram picture, every kick Emily felt, every excited comment from David pushed them closer to the edge. They were sitting on a powder keg, and the fuse was burning short. It was only a matter of time before their carefully constructed lies came crashing down around them. Little did they know, the worst was yet to come. The decision Emily would make next would set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. As Emily's pregnancy progressed, so did her desperation. The web of lies she had spun was beginning to fray at the edges, threatening to unravel entirely. Time was running out. Soon, the baby would be born, and there would be no hiding the truth. David had already commented on how the child seemed to be developing faster than expected. It was only a matter of time before he would insist on a paternity test, if only to rule out any potential health issues. Emily knew she was trapped. Her mind, once filled with dreams of fashion runways and glamorous parties, now turned to darker thoughts. She began to see only one way out of her predicament. The idea came to her one sleepless night as she lay beside David, his gentle snores a stark contrast to the turmoil in her mind. If David were to die, her problems would die with him. The thought, once formed, refused to leave Emily. Planning was meticulous. She researched untraceable poisons, studying their effects and how to obtain them. She familiarized herself with David's life insurance policy, ensuring she was the sole beneficiary. She even began to suddenly mention to friends how stressed and overworked David had been lately, planting seeds of a potential health crisis. Every detail was considered. Emily chose a slow-acting poison that would mimic the symptoms of a heart attack. She planned to administer it over time, gradually building up the dosage to avoid suspicion. In her mind, it was the perfect crime. David would pass away seemingly from natural causes, leaving her free to raise their child with Darius. But Emily knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed an alibi, someone to corroborate her story when the time came. She needed Darius. Darius's reaction when Emily finally revealed her plan was one of horror and disbelief. "You can't be serious," he whispered, his face pale in the dim light of his bedroom. "That's my father you're talking about." Emily's eyes flashed with a desperation that chilled Darius to his core. "It's the only way," she insisted. "Do you want your father to know what we've done? Do you want this child to be born into scandal and shame?" Darius found himself torn between loyalty to his father and fear of the consequences of their actions. The weight of their secret pressed down on him, suffocating him with guilt and indecision. Days passed as Darius grappled with Emily's proposal. He avoided his father's eyes at the breakfast table, feeling sick every time David spoke excitedly about the baby's impending arrival. The sight of Emily calmly going about her daily routine while planning his father's murder filled him with a mixture of revulsion and a twisted sort of admiration. Finally, worn down by Emily's relentless pressure and his own fear of discovery, Darius gave in. His agreement was reluctant, a whispered okay that seemed to echo in the silence of the night. With those words, he became an accomplice to murder. As Emily's plan moved forward, Darius found himself caught in a nightmare of his own making. He watched in silent horror as Emily began to slip small amounts of poison into David's evening tea. He listened with a forced smile as his father complained of feeling under the weather, knowing the true cause of his deteriorating health. The stage was set. The players were in position. As David's health began to decline, Emily and Darius waited with bated breath for their plan to reach its tragic conclusion. But in the dark world of murder and betrayal, things rarely go as planned. The night of October 15th started like any other in the Johnson household, but beneath the calm exterior, a storm was brewing. Tonight was the night Emily had chosen to put her plan into action. As the hands of the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9 p.m., Emily's heart raced. She moved with practiced ease, preparing David's nightly tea, Earl Grey, his favorite. Her hands trembled slightly as she added the final fatal dose of poison. David sat in his study, oblivious to the danger that approached. He smiled warmly as Emily entered, gratefully accepting the steaming cup. Emily perched on the edge of his desk, engaging him in light conversation, her eyes fixed on the cup as David raised it to his lips. Upstairs, Darius paced in his room, his conscience waging war with his fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every muffled voice from below sent his heart racing. He was an accomplice to murder, and the weight of that knowledge threatened to crush him. As minutes ticked by, Emily watched David intently, waiting for the poison to take effect. But something was wrong. David's brow furrowed, not in pain, but in confusion. He looked at the cup, then at Emily, suspicion dawning in his eyes. "This tastes different," he said slowly, pushing the cup away. Emily's carefully constructed plan began to unravel. In her panic, she had added too much poison, altering the tea's flavor. David, always attuned to detail, had noticed. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. David, realizing something was terribly wrong, stood up abruptly. Driven by desperation, Emily grabbed the heavy marble paperweight from his desk. Their eyes met for a brief, horrifying moment before Emily swung. The sickening sound of impact filled the room as David crumpled to the floor, a trickle of blood forming around his head. Emily stood frozen, the paperweight slipping from her grasp. The house fell into a deathly quiet, broken only by the sound of Darius's footsteps racing down the stairs. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emily, shaking uncontrollably, turned to him with wild eyes. "Help me," she pleaded. "We have to make this look like an accident." The next few hours were a nightmare of cleanup and staged evidence. They positioned David at the bottom of the stairs, creating the illusion of a tragic fall. Emily smeared her makeup, preparing to play the part of the distraught wife. At midnight, with trembling fingers, Emily dialed 911. "Please," she sobbed into the phone, her acting skills put to the ultimate test. "My husband. He's fallen down the stairs. He's not breathing. Please hurry." As the wail of approaching sirens filled the air, Emily and Darius exchanged a look of mingled fear and grim resolution. There was no turning back now. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. The police arrived within minutes, followed closely by paramedics. As flashlights swept the scene and questions began, Emily clung to Darius, both playing their parts in this macabre theater. But even as they answered the officers' questions, they knew that this was only the beginning. The real test was yet to come.
As dawn broke over Atlanta, Detective Alicia Thompson arrived at the Johnson residence. A veteran of the homicide division, Thompson's keen eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the scene. "Something doesn't add up," she muttered, crouching by the stairs where David's body had been found. Thompson's investigation began with standard procedure. She interviewed Emily and Darius separately, noting their grief-stricken demeanor. To the untrained eye, they appeared to be a family in mourning, but Thompson sensed an undercurrent of tension, a flicker of something more in their eyes.
Initially, the evidence seemed to support the accident theory. David's health had been declining, potentially contributing to a fall. Colleagues confirmed his heavy workload and stress. It appeared to be a tragic but straightforward case. But Detective Thompson wasn't satisfied. Small inconsistencies nagged at her. The position of David's body didn't quite match a typical fall, and then there was the toxicology report. Traces of an unusual substance were found in David's system. As Thompson dug deeper, more red flags emerged. Emily's timeline of events didn't quite align with the neighbors' recollection of when they heard the commotion. Darius's alibi for the hours leading up to the incident was vague and unverifiable. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: David's smartwatch. The health data showed a sudden, drastic spike in heart rate moments before his supposed fall, consistent with something other than simply losing balance. Armed with a search warrant, Thompson's team combed the Johnson home. In a locked drawer in Emily's vanity, they found a vial of the same substance detected in David's toxicology report. Hidden in Darius's room was a crumpled note detailing what appeared to be the early stages of a plan. As news of the investigation spread, the affluent Atlanta suburb was rocked. The affluent Atlanta suburb was rocked to its core. Neighbors who had once envied the Johnsons now whispered behind closed doors. How could this happen in their community? Emily's baby shower, planned for the following week, was hastily canceled. Darius was suspended from the basketball team, pending the investigation. The perfect facade of the Johnson family crumbled under the weight of suspicion and scandal. In a shocking turn of events, it was Darius who finally broke. Unable to bear the guilt any longer, he confessed everything to Detective Thompson. The affair, the pregnancy, and the desperate plan that had led to his father's death. As Emily and Darius were led away in handcuffs, their neighbors watched in stunned silence. The community that had once held the Johnsons as a shining example of success was left to grapple with the dark truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Detective Thompson stood on the front lawn of the Johnson home, watching as crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze. She had solved the case, but the tragedy of it all weighed heavily on her. A family destroyed, lives ruined, all because of secrets and lies. As the sun set on Peachtree Heights, casting long shadows across manicured lawns, the neighborhood would never be quite the same again. The Johnson case would serve as a grim reminder that sometimes the perfect life is anything but. In the wake of Darius's confession, the legal machinery of Fulton County swung into action. Emily and Darius Johnson were arrested and charged with the murder of David Johnson. The district attorney's office, sensing the high-profile nature of the case, assigned their top prosecutor. The trial that followed captivated Atlanta and made national headlines. Over 6 grueling weeks, the sordid details of the Johnson family tragedy were laid bare for the jury and the public. The prosecution painted a picture of greed, lust, and desperation, while the defense argued for leniency, citing the pressure of circumstances and momentary lapses in judgment. In the end, the evidence was too damning to ignore. The jury deliberated for just 2 days before returning their verdict: guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, the judge's words were stern and unequivocal. Emily Johnson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. Darius, in consideration of his eventual cooperation with authorities, received a sentence of 25 years to life. As mother and son were led away to begin their sentences, a palpable sense of loss hung over the courtroom. There were no winners here, only victims. David, whose life was cut tragically short. The unborn child who would enter the world behind prison walls. And yes, even Emily and Darius, whose actions had irrevocably altered the course of their lives. In the months and years that followed, the impact of the Johnson case continued to reverberate through Atlanta and beyond. True crime podcasts dissected every detail, and books were written attempting to understand the psychology behind the tragedy. The affluent neighborhood of Peachtree Heights, once a symbol of success and stability, became synonymous with scandal and hidden darkness. But perhaps the most profound impact was on those who knew the Johnsons personally. Friends and neighbors were left to grapple with difficult questions. How well do we truly know those around us? What secrets might lie behind the facade of perfection? In the end, the Johnson case serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of secrets and lies. It's a cautionary tale of how quickly a seemingly perfect life can unravel when built on a foundation of deception. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell for daily updates.